This is the story of a 38-year-old woman who died in a tragic accident and found herself standing before Jesus Christ. In his presence, she was shown the terrifying truth about the Antichrist. Stay with me until the end of this story. It's one you won't forget. My name is Isabella Greenfield, and never in my wildest dreams did I think my life would end at 38. I had a seemingly ordinary life in suburban Illinois, where the seasons were as distinct as they were beautiful. Summers were hot and humid, while winters brought a serene stillness, interrupted only by the sound of snowplows carving paths through icy streets. I lived in a modest home with my husband, Daniel, and our 2 children. Daniel was my rock, steady, hardworking, and supportive in ways I often felt I didn't deserve. Our children, Emma and Liam, were the joy of our lives. Emma, 10, was creative and introspective, while Liam, at just 6, was an endless bundle of energy, always viewing the world as a grand adventure. By profession, I was a middle school teacher. It was a job that demanded every ounce of my patience, but rewarded me with moments that made it all worthwhile. There's something incredibly fulfilling about watching a child wrestle with a tough idea and finally grasp it, their eyes lighting up with understanding. It made me feel like I was contributing to something bigger, even if the rewards weren't always immediate. Faith had always played a quiet role in my life. My parents believed in God, but church wasn't a weekly ritual. It was reserved for weddings, funerals, or the occasional Christmas service. As I grew older, I felt drawn to spiritual ideas, though I never fully committed to any particular path. I prayed when I sought comfort, thanked God when things went well, and existed in a state of flux between belief and doubt. My faith was like background music, always there, but never the focal point. Life in the suburbs followed a predictable rhythm. Weekdays blurred into a haze of early mornings, late nights, and juggling work with family responsibilities. Helping Emma with homework, entertaining Liam long enough to cook dinner, and tackling the endless cycle of laundry. It was a routine, but it was ours. Looking back, I realize how much I took for granted. It's strange how the value of ordinary moments only becomes clear when they're gone, or when something extraordinary shatters them. At the time, I thought I understood my world and my place in it. I didn't realize how much I was coasting through life, too distracted or too afraid to look closely at my faith. What if I didn't like what I found? What if the answers weren't there? Or worse, what if they were? It was easier to keep faith at arm's length, to believe just enough to feel safe, but not enough to challenge myself. I told myself I was spiritual, not religious, and left it at that. Suburban Illinois felt like the perfect setting for someone like me, safe, predictable, and routine. The biggest dramas were canceled soccer games or a neighbor's dog rummaging through the trash. It was the last place I expected life-altering events to unfold. But life has a way of surprising you, especially when you least expect it. That morning started like any other. My alarm cut through my dreams with its shrill beeping. Daniel was already up. I could hear the faint clink of his coffee mug in the kitchen. He's always been a morning person, savoring the quiet stillness of those early hours, while I dragged myself out of bed, half asleep. The mornings in our house were chaotic at best. Emma, ever the responsible one, was already at the kitchen table with her cereal and a book in hand. Liam, on the other hand, needed coaxing, bargaining, and sometimes outright bribery to get moving. That day was no exception. Breakfast was its usual whirlwind. Daniel had made eggs and toast, leaving the kitchen looking like a small tornado had passed through. Emma was excitedly talking about a group project, while Liam chattered nonstop about superheroes. I tried to keep up while mentally running through my day. Papers to grade, a parent-teacher conference, and a lesson plan on fractions that I wasn't entirely confident would hold the kids' attention. The drive to school was uneventful. I dropped the kids off, Emma with a quick hug, looking embarrassed in front of her friends, and Liam with a playful fist bump as he dashed off to the playground. It was just another ordinary day. Or so I thought. What I didn't know was that this day would change everything, that my understanding of faith, life, and myself was about to be turned upside down. If I had known, maybe I would have hugged my kids a little tighter, prayed a little harder, or paid attention to the whispers of faith that had always been in the background. But I didn't know, and life, as it often does, caught me completely off guard. As I drove away from school that afternoon, I felt a familiar mix of love and exasperation, emotions that come with being a parent. My children were growing up so quickly, and some days I felt like I was just trying to keep pace. At school, the day unfolded in its usual rhythm. The first bell rang, followed by the shuffle of students settling into their seats, their low chatter taking a few minutes to die down. Despite the challenges, I loved my students. They were at that awkward stage, too old to be children, but not yet teenagers. They could frustrate me one moment and surprise me with their insights the next. Teaching them was a challenge, but also a joy. I still remember the sense of pride I felt that day when one of my students, Marcus, finally solved a math problem he'd been struggling with all week. Moments like that made everything worthwhile. During lunch, I met with a parent to discuss their child's progress. It was nothing major, just the usual concerns about grades and behavior. I reassured them that their child was doing fine, explaining that middle school was a tough period for everyone and that things would get better with time. Afterward, I ate my sandwich at my desk while catching up on emails and preparing for the next day. It wasn't glamorous, but it was my routine, and I found comfort in its predictability. When the final bell rang, I was ready to head home. It had been a good day, busy, but fulfilling. I felt that satisfying tiredness that comes from knowing you've done your job well. I packed my things, exchanged a few goodbyes with colleagues, and headed to my car, already thinking about dinner. Daniel had mentioned grilling, and the thought of a quiet evening at home with my family brought a smile to my face. Maybe we'd play a board game or watch a movie together. The drive home was uneventful at first, a familiar mix of stoplights and well-worn streets. I glanced at the clock and considered stopping at the store for a few things. I was mulling over what to pair with the grilled chicken, a salad, perhaps, or roasted vegetables. It was such an ordinary thought, one that seems almost surreal now, knowing what came next. Looking back, I realize how much I took for granted that day. The laughter at breakfast, the small victories in the classroom, and the comforting predictability of my routine. Everything felt so normal, so permanent. I had no idea that in mere moments, my life would be turned upside down. It happened so fast. One moment I was driving home, humming along to the radio and planning dinner, and the next, my world was spinning out of control. I don't even remember seeing the car that hit me. There was no warning, no time to react. The impact was sudden and violent, sending everything into chaos. The sound of the crash was deafening, metal screeching against metal. The force of the collision reverberated through my body, as though I were a rag doll being tossed around. My hands instinctively gripped the steering wheel, but it was futile. The car had a mind of its own, skidding and spinning across the road. A sickening crunch followed as the airbags deployed, slamming into me with jarring force. Everything became disjointed, as if I were both inside my body and watching the scene from afar. In the moments after the crash, there was an eerie silence, as though time itself had paused. Then, the pain began, not sharp, but a dull, suffocating pressure in my chest. I tried to move, but my body felt pinned down, as if something heavy was holding me in place. My head spun, and my vision blurred in and out. Distant sounds, a car horn, muffled voices, seemed far away, as if I were submerged underwater. I tried to breathe, but the air wouldn't come. Panic started to creep in as my mind raced. Was I okay? Were there other cars involved? What about the other driver? Questions flooded my thoughts, but I couldn't hold on to any of them. Everything felt like it was slipping away. And then something changed. It's difficult to describe, but there was a moment when I felt completely detached from my body. I could see myself slumped over the steering wheel, blood trickling down my forehead. But it didn't feel like me anymore. It was just a shell, something I was observing, not a part of. The pain was gone, replaced by an overwhelming calm. I wasn't scared. I wasn't anything really. Just there. I watched as the paramedics arrived, moving with practiced urgency. Their voices were sharp and clear as they worked to free me from the wreckage. One of them, a woman with kind eyes, leaned into the car and checked for a pulse. I wanted to tell them I was okay, that I could hear them, but no sound came out. They carefully pulled my body from the car and began CPR. I saw the concern etched on their faces and the steady determination in their movements. The flashing lights of the ambulance bathed the scene in an eerie glow. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of sadness, not for myself, but for Daniel, Emma, and Liam. What would they do if I didn't make it? The thought of them waiting at home, unaware of what had happened, was almost unbearable. And then something else happened. The light began to change. It wasn't the harsh, flashing red and blue of the ambulance lights anymore. It was softer, warmer, and seemed to come from everywhere at once. I felt myself being drawn toward it, like a gentle pull I couldn't resist. It wasn't frightening. In fact, it was the most peaceful experience I'd ever had. All the noise and chaos faded away, leaving only an incredible sense of love and calm. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I wasn't alone. There was a presence, something so comforting and reassuring that I felt completely safe, even as I left the accident scene behind. It was as if every worry, every fear, every doubt I'd ever had was being washed away. I didn't understand it, but I didn't need to. All I knew was that something extraordinary was happening, and there was no turning back. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just an accident. This was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the world beyond. As I moved toward the light, the sense of peace grew stronger. It wasn't just an absence of pain or fear, it was an overwhelming feeling of love, as if every part of me was embraced by something so pure and complete it was beyond anything I'd ever experienced. The light wasn't blinding or harsh. It was soft, warm, and radiant, filling every corner of my being. I felt lighter, freer, as if every burden I'd ever carried was lifted. It was as though, for the first time, I was truly alive, even as I left my body behind. At first, I couldn't see much beyond the light. It was all-encompassing, yet not intimidating. It wasn't like walking through a tunnel, as I'd heard others describe. It was more like being gently drawn forward, as if something or someone was calling and guiding me. There was no fear, no hesitation, just an instinctive sense of trust. I knew I was going somewhere I was meant to be. Then, as I moved further into the light, I saw him. There are no words to fully describe what it was like to see Jesus Christ. He wasn't exactly how I had imagined him. His presence wasn't just physical, though he was undeniably real, standing before me. It was the way he radiated love and understanding, as if he could see every part of me, every thought, every fear, every failure, and still love me completely. His eyes were unlike anything I had ever seen, deep, compassionate, and filled with a wisdom that seemed to span eternity. He didn't speak at first, but I felt his words in my heart. It was as though he was communicating directly with my soul, bypassing language entirely. I could feel his understanding of everything I had been through, every struggle and doubt, even the moments of faith I had pushed aside or ignored. There was no judgment, only kindness and patience, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. When he did speak, his voice wasn't loud or commanding. It was steady and calm, but it carried an authority that couldn't be ignored. "You are here for a reason," he said. His words resonated deep within me. I didn't fully understand what he meant, but I knew that whatever was happening wasn't random. There was a purpose to it, a purpose to me. He reached out. Though he didn't physically touch me, I felt something shift inside me. It was as if every part of me was being realigned, healed in ways I hadn't realized I needed. I felt whole in a way I never had before. Then he showed me. It wasn't like watching a movie or dreaming. It was as though I was living the visions he revealed, fully immersed in the sights, sounds, and emotions of what was to come. The first thing I saw was Earth, but it wasn't the Earth I knew. It was ravaged by storms, earthquakes, and floods, as if the very fabric of creation was tearing itself apart. Cities crumbled, forests burned, and the cries of people echoed all around me. I felt their fear, desperation, and helplessness as they faced a world spiraling out of control. But that was just the beginning. The next vision was even more chilling. I saw a man, a figure who, at first, seemed full of light and promise. He was charismatic, with a presence that drew people to him like moths to a flame. He spoke of peace, unity, and solutions to the world's problems. People followed him with almost blind devotion, desperate to believe in his promises. But there was something beneath his charm, something dark and insidious. His words were like honey, but his intentions were venom. I realized I was seeing the Antichrist. Jesus didn't need to tell me, I just knew. This man wasn't what he appeared to be. He was a deceiver, using his charisma and promises to manipulate and control. I saw how he used technology in ways that seemed miraculous, a global currency system that promised equality but enslaved people instead, advanced AI that monitored and controlled every aspect of life, and a surveillance system that left no room for privacy or dissent. He even performed what seemed like miracles, convincing people he was divine. The world fell under his spell, divided between those who followed him and those who resisted. Those who refused to bow to his system were isolated, persecuted, and labeled as enemies of peace. I saw families torn apart, communities destroyed, and believers in Christ hunted for their faith. The world he created looked unified on the surface, but it was built on fear, lies, and control. I turned to Jesus, overwhelmed by what I was seeing. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, though the words felt inadequate to express the flood of emotions I was feeling. His response was both gentle and firm. "You must understand the times that are coming. You must prepare your heart and help others to do the same. Many will be deceived, but those who remain faithful to me will find hope even in the darkest of days." He showed me the faithful, small groups of believers who refused to give in to deception. They were scattered, hidden in pockets of resistance, but their faith was unwavering. The faithful were unshakable. They didn't rely on the systems of the world. They relied on him. I saw their courage, their strength, and the way they clung to each other and to Jesus. They were a light in the darkness, a testament to the power of faith. I didn't want to leave his presence. Being with him felt like being home, as though every question I'd ever had was answered in a way that words could never express. But he told me it wasn't my time. "You must go back," he said. Though I didn't want to, I understood. There was a purpose for me, a reason I had been shown these things. As the light began to fade, I felt a sense of longing, but also a renewed determination. I didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but I knew one thing for certain. My life would never be the same. I couldn't ignore what I had seen, and I couldn't turn away from the calling he had placed on my heart. The visions Jesus showed me weren't just images. They were experiences. Each one felt vivid and real, immersing me completely. It was as if I had been dropped into a world that was both familiar and alien, a distorted reflection of the life I had known. I could feel the weight of what was happening, the emotions of the people around me, and the chaos pulsing through every corner of existence. The first thing I saw was the earth itself, and it was in turmoil. Natural disasters struck with unimaginable ferocity. Earthquakes ripped through cities, reducing towering skyscrapers to rubble in mere seconds. Floods surged through the streets, carrying cars, trees, and homes in their relentless currents. Fires consumed entire landscapes, turning lush forests into barren wastelands. I could hear the cries of people, their voices filled with fear and confusion as they struggled to understand what was happening. It wasn't just the natural world in chaos. The very fabric of society was unraveling. Economies collapsed overnight, leaving people desperate and hopeless. Long lines formed outside the few remaining stores, guarded by armed personnel controlling the dwindling supplies of food and water. Parents clutched their children, elderly couples huddled together, and young men and women stood looking lost and defeated. The fear in their eyes was haunting. And then, amidst the chaos, he appeared. At first, the man seemed like a beacon of hope. He was charismatic, with a voice that soothed the fears of everyone who heard him. He promised solutions, a way to bring peace and order back to the world. People were drawn to him, flocking to him in droves, desperate for the security he offered. He spoke of unity, of breaking down barriers between nations, of creating a world where everyone could thrive together. His words were like music, falling on eager ears. I watched as the world began to follow him. Governments aligned themselves with his vision, declaring him a leader unlike any they had ever seen. People hailed him as a savior, believing he had the power to restore what had been lost. But beneath his promises lay something sinister. His eyes, though warm and inviting, carried a darkness that sent shivers through me. I knew who he was, even if the world did not. This man, this Antichrist, wasn't acting alone. He wielded tools and powers that seemed otherworldly. I saw him use advanced technology to tighten his grip on humanity. One of his most powerful tools was a global currency system. At first, it seemed like a brilliant solution to the economic chaos. People no longer needed cash. Everything was digital, seamless, and efficient. But the system was entirely controlled by him and his followers. Without access to it, people couldn't buy or sell, couldn't feed their families, couldn't survive. It became a tool of oppression, forcing people into submission. He harnessed AI and surveillance technology to monitor every aspect of life. Cameras and sensors were everywhere, watching, recording, analyzing. Privacy became a thing of the past. Anyone who dared to question him or refused to align with his system was flagged, isolated, and punished. The technology was so advanced it seemed almost magical, but it was used to erode freedom and break the will of those who resisted. He performed miracles, or at least they seemed like miracles. I watched as he healed the sick, made food appear out of thin air, and even controlled the weather. People were in awe, convinced he was divine. But I could see the truth. These weren't miracles of God. They were deceptions meant to lure people into worshiping him. The line between truth and lies blurred, and many couldn't see the difference. The world he created appeared perfect on the surface, peaceful, unified, prosperous, but it was a facade. Beneath it lay control, fear, and deception. Those who refused to follow him were labeled as enemies of progress and peace. Families were torn apart, as some chose to follow the Antichrist while others clung to their faith in Jesus. Believers were hunted down, imprisoned, and even killed. Their communities were infiltrated, their gatherings disrupted, their voices silenced. Yet, even in the midst of this darkness, there was light. Jesus showed me the faithful, small groups of believers who refused to bow to the Antichrist or accept his mark. They were scattered, often hiding in remote places, but their faith was unshakable. They prayed together, supported one another, and held on to the promises of God. They didn't rely on the systems of the world. They relied on him. Their courage was incredible. They faced persecution, hunger, and even death, yet they stood firm, knowing their hope wasn't in this world, but in the eternal life promised by Jesus. Their faith shone like a beacon in the darkness. It didn't matter how small their numbers were. Their belief was powerful and unyielding. They didn't fight with weapons or anger. They fought with love, prayer, and the truth of God's word. They reminded me of a candle burning in a storm, not extinguished, but standing strong, defying the winds that threatened to snuff it out. Jesus instilled in me a deep sense of urgency. He didn't just want me to witness these things. He wanted me to understand them, to prepare for them, and to help others do the same. His voice echoed in my heart, calm but firm. Asterisk, the deception will be great, but my truth is greater. Many will be led astray, but those who seek me will find me. Stand firm, and do not be afraid. Asterisk. As the visions began to fade, I felt a mix of emotions. The weight of what I had seen was almost unbearable, yet there was hope. I had seen the power of faith, the resilience of those who stood with Jesus, even in the face of unimaginable trials. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that he would never abandon those who trusted in him. I was left with a profound sense of responsibility. These visions weren't meant solely for me. They were meant to be shared. Jesus was calling me to be a voice, a witness to what was coming, and to help others prepare, not just for the trials, but for the hope and victory that would ultimately come through him. As the visions faded, I found myself standing in his presence, the images of chaos, deception, and faith etched deeply into my being. The enormity of it all left me shaken, but his gaze met mine, steady and filled with love. Though overwhelmed, I felt peace in his presence. Jesus wasn't showing me these things to frighten me. He was preparing me. Deep in my soul, I knew this was a calling, a purpose I could no longer ignore. His words were filled with both authority and love. Asterisk, what you have seen is the beginning of what must come. The enemy will seek to deceive, to destroy, and to lead many astray. But I have overcome the world, and those who remain in me will not be lost. Asterisk. I clung to his words, letting them sink into my heart. They weren't just promises. They were lifelines, reminders that even in the face of darkness, there is hope. His love surrounded me, stronger than anything I had ever known, and it gave me the courage to listen as he continued. Asterisk, you must prepare your heart and help others to do the same. The times ahead will be difficult. Many will be deceived by the promises of the enemy, but those who know me, who seek me, will recognize the truth. They will not be led astray. Asterisk. I thought of the deceptions I had seen, the Antichrist's charisma, the technological miracles, the false sense of unity masking control and oppression. It was so clear how easily people could fall into the trap. The promises of peace and prosperity would be tempting, especially in a world desperate for stability. But Jesus showed me that the price of accepting those lies would be far greater than anyone could imagine. How will they know? I asked him, my voice trembling. How will people recognize the truth when everything seems so convincing? Jesus smiled, a small, gentle smile that calmed my soul. They will know if they know me, he said. Asterisk, the truth is not hidden from those who seek it. My sheep hear my voice, and they follow me. The enemy's lies cannot stand against my word. Teach them to remain in me, to trust me above all else. Asterisk. His words carried a profound weight. It wasn't about knowing every detail of what was to come, but about having a relationship with him. Knowing him so deeply that his truth would always shine brighter than any deception. This wasn't just a warning, it was an invitation. An invitation to draw closer to him, to build a faith so strong that no storm could shake it. Jesus began to share specific signs to watch for, things that would signal the unfolding of the events I had seen. He spoke of advances in technology and how tools meant to improve life would instead be used to control it. He described the global currency system, introduced as a solution to economic instability, but ultimately becoming a means of oppression. He warned about the increasing reliance on artificial intelligence and surveillance, stripping away privacy and freedom under the guise of security. These things will come, he said. Asterisk, but do not be afraid. They are signs, not the end. They are meant to awaken, not to destroy. Asterisk. I asked him about the faithful, the small groups I had seen in the visions. They resisted the Antichrist and clung to their faith in Jesus. How will they survive? I asked. How will they stand when everything is against them? They will not stand alone, he replied. Asterisk, I will be with them. My spirit will guide them, strengthen them, and sustain them. They will find each other, drawn together by their faith, and they will become my light in the darkness. They may be few, but their faith will move mountains. Asterisk. I saw those small communities again in my mind, hidden away, praying together, encouraging one another. They weren't warriors or leaders. They were ordinary people. But their faith made them stronger than anything the enemy could throw at them. They didn't have much, but what they had was enough, because they had Jesus. Jesus said, Asterisk, tell them. Asterisk, his voice carried urgency. Asterisk, tell them to prepare, not in fear, but in faith. Tell them to build their lives on me, to know my word and my voice. Tell them to seek me now while there is still time, so they will not be shaken when the storms come. Asterisk. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. The weight of his words and the responsibility he placed on me were overwhelming, yet freeing. I didn't have to do this alone. He would be with me every step of the way, just as he would be with those who heard and believed. As the light around us began to change, I felt myself being drawn back. The warmth and radiance of his presence started to fade. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay with him forever. But I understood my work wasn't done. "You must go back," he said, his voice filled with love. But remember, I am always with you. I will never leave you, and I will never forsake you. As the light dimmed, and I felt myself returning to my body, his final words echoed in my heart. Be not afraid. Strong and courageous, Jesus had said. The days ahead will be difficult, but my grace is sufficient. Trust in me, and you will not fall. Even now, I can still feel the weight of that moment, the clarity of his presence, and the power of his words. They weren't just for me. They were for everyone. And I knew, without a doubt, that my life would never be the same. Returning to my body felt like waking from the deepest sleep, but instead of rest, I was met with an aching heaviness. At first, everything was a blur. I couldn't tell where I was or what was happening. My mind struggled to process the enormity of what I had just experienced. It was as though I had been lifted to the highest of heavens and then dropped back into a world that felt too small, too confining. The first thing I noticed was the beeping, a steady, rhythmic sound that cut through the fog in my head. Then came the voices, muffled at first, but gradually becoming clearer. Someone was calling my name, their voice tinged with relief and disbelief. My eyes fluttered open, and I was met with the bright, sterile lights of a hospital room. The air smelled of disinfectant, tinged with something metallic. Machines surrounded me, wires and tubes connecting my body to monitors and 4 drips. A nurse leaned over me, her face a mixture of shock and amazement. "Isabella," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "you're awake." Her words sounded surreal, as if I were hearing them underwater. Awake? Of course, I was awake. But as my mind cleared, I realized why she sounded so surprised. The accident. The crash. The memories rushed back. The impact. The sound of metal crumpling. And that moment when I saw my body being pulled from the wreckage. For a second, panic surged. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of it all. Was it real? Had I truly seen Jesus? Or was it a dream, a hallucination brought on by trauma? Before I could dwell on these thoughts, Daniel burst into the room. His face was pale, his eyes red from crying. He rushed to my side, grabbing my hand, tears streaming down his face. "Isabella," he choked out, "you're okay. You're alive." His words hit me like a wave. Alive. Somehow, against all odds, I had survived. A lump rose in my throat as I looked at him, his relief so palpable it was overwhelming. He kissed my hand repeatedly, whispering words of gratitude, love, and disbelief. I tried to speak, to reassure him, but my voice came out as a croak. My throat felt raw, and every part of my body ached. Still, I managed to squeeze his hand, letting him know I was there. Doctors entered the room shortly after, their faces a mixture of professionalism and amazement. One of them, a tall man with graying hair, introduced himself as Dr. Patel. He explained my condition in measured tones. "You suffered severe injuries in the accident," he began, scanning his clipboard. "Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, and significant trauma to your head and chest. When you arrived, we weren't sure if you would survive." He paused, his gaze softening. "Frankly, it's a miracle you're alive. Your heart stopped twice during surgery, and we had to revive you. And yet, here you are, awake and stable. It's extraordinary." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. A miracle. I had heard the word before, but it had never felt as real as it did in that moment. I glanced at Daniel, who nodded, lips pressed tightly, as if holding back a flood of emotions. As I lay there, I wanted to tell them what I had seen, about Jesus and the visions, but the words wouldn't come. Not yet. The following days were a blur of recovery, physical therapy, endless tests, and cautious advice from the medical staff to take things slowly. My body felt battered and weak, but my spirit had never been stronger. During those long hours in the hospital bed, I replayed everything I had seen: the light, the visions, the presence of Jesus. It was all so vivid, so undeniable. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been given a second chance, a purpose. Daniel stayed by my side through it all. He slept in the uncomfortable chair next to my bed, held my hand during painful moments, and listened patiently when I finally found the strength to speak about what had happened. At first, I was hesitant. How could I even begin to describe something so extraordinary? But when I told him about the light, about Jesus, and the visions of the future, he didn't laugh or dismiss me. He listened, his eyes wide with wonder. And when I finished, he simply said, "I believe you." His faith in me, and in my experience, was like a balm to my soul. It gave me the courage to share my story with others, friends, family, even the hospital staff. Not everyone reacted the same way. Some nodded politely, their faces skeptical but kind. Others looked at me with awe, trying to reconcile my story with the person before them. A few outright dismissed it, attributing it to a near-death hallucination or the effects of medication. But no matter how people responded, I knew the truth. What I had experienced was real. Jesus was real. The visions were real. And the warnings he had given me weren't just for me. They were for everyone. When the doctors finally discharged me, they called my recovery miraculous. They credited my will to live, but I knew the truth. It wasn't my will that had brought me back. It was his. As I stepped out of the hospital for the first time in weeks, Daniel by my side, the sunlight warmed my face. I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I was alive, not just physically, but spiritually. I had been given a gift, a responsibility, and I knew I couldn't waste it. With a purpose, whatever lay ahead, whatever challenges I would face, I knew I wouldn't face them alone. Jesus had shown me the way, and I would follow it, no matter where it led. Coming home felt surreal, as if I were walking into a life that wasn't entirely mine anymore. Everything looked the same. The kitchen with its slightly chipped countertops, the family photos on the wall, the cozy living room where Daniel and I had spent so many evenings watching movies with the kids. But everything felt different. Or maybe it was me. I couldn't look at the world the way I used to, not after what I had experienced. The kids ran to greet me the moment I walked through the door. Emma hugged me gently, her eyes filled with relief, while Liam, oblivious to my injuries, practically launched himself at me. I winced from the pain but hugged them both tightly, feeling tears well up in my eyes. For a moment, I was just their mom again, no visions, no warnings, just a mother grateful to be alive and home with her family. But the weight of what I had seen never left me. Even in those first few days of being back, as I tried to settle into a routine of rest and recovery, the memories of the visions haunted me, the faces of people deceived by the Antichrist, the faithful hiding in fear, yet standing firm, the chaos and destruction. I couldn't shake it. I knew I wasn't meant to. Jesus had shown me these things for a reason, and now that I was home, I needed to figure out what to do with them. At first, I tried to share my experience cautiously, starting with those closest to me. Daniel had already heard the story in the hospital, and he was incredibly supportive. But when I told some of my friends and extended family, their reactions were mixed. Some listened intently, their eyes wide as I described the light, the presence of Jesus, and the visions of the future. Others smiled politely, clearly unsure whether to take me seriously. A few even dismissed it outright, saying things like, "You've been through a lot. It's probably just your brain trying to make sense of the trauma." Those reactions stung more than I wanted to admit. It was hard enough to put into words something so profound, so deeply spiritual, only to have it brushed aside. But then I remembered the look in Jesus' eyes when he told me to share what I had seen. He hadn't promised it would be easy. He had simply told me to do it. So I kept trying, even when it was uncomfortable, even when people doubted me. I wasn't sharing my story to convince anyone. I was sharing it because I had to. The truth of what I had experienced was too important to keep to myself. As the weeks went on, I started noticing things in the world around me, small, subtle signs that seemed to align with the visions Jesus had shown me. News reports about advancements in AI and surveillance technology made me think of the systems the Antichrist would use to control people. Talks of global economic instability reminded me of the unified currency system I had seen. Even cultural shifts, the growing polarization, the erosion of truth, seemed to echo the warnings I had been given. I couldn't ignore it. The world was changing, slowly but surely, moving toward the events Jesus had shown me. It wasn't happening all at once, and it wasn't obvious to most people, but the signs were there for those paying attention. I felt a deep urgency to help others see what I was seeing, to help them prepare, not just for the physical changes, but for the spiritual challenges ahead. The hardest part was figuring out where to begin. I wasn't a preacher or a theologian. I was just a middle school teacher, a wife, and a mom. What could I possibly do to make a difference? I spent hours in prayer, asking Jesus for guidance and wisdom on how to carry out the task he had given me. Slowly, I began to realize that I didn't need to have all the answers. I just needed to take the first step. That step, for me, was sharing my story with my church. It wasn't easy. I was nervous, afraid of being judged or dismissed, but I knew I couldn't let fear hold me back. When I stood in front of the congregation and began to speak, my voice trembled at first, but as I continued, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I told them everything from the accident to the visions to the warnings Jesus had given me. By the time I finished, there were tears in my eyes and in the eyes of many in the audience. Afterward, people came up to me, some thanking me for sharing, others asking questions about what they could do to prepare. A few even shared their own stories of spiritual experiences and how they had felt a similar urgency to draw closer to God. It was humbling and encouraging, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this journey. But it wasn't all positive. Some people were skeptical, even critical, questioning the validity of my experience. One man, a deacon in the church, told me bluntly that he thought I had misunderstood what I saw, that it was likely just a vivid dream brought on by trauma. His words stung, but I reminded myself that my job wasn't to convince anyone. My job was to share the truth as I had experienced it and trust God with the rest. At home, my life began to change in ways I hadn't expected. I found myself praying more, reading the Bible with a hunger I had never felt before. Passages that I had skimmed over in the past now seemed to leap off the page, filled with meaning and relevance. I started teaching Emma and Liam about what it means to trust in Jesus, not just in words but in action. We began having family devotionals, something we had never done before, and I watched as my children started to grow in their own faith. Daniel, too, was changing. He had always been supportive of my faith, even if he wasn't particularly devout himself, but now I saw him beginning to take it more seriously. We started praying together, something we hadn't done since our wedding day, and it brought us closer in ways I hadn't thought possible. Despite these positive changes, I couldn't shake the sense of urgency that hung over me. The world was moving closer to the events I had seen, and I felt a deep responsibility to help as many people as I could. I didn't know where this journey would lead, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't go back to the way things were. Jesus had shown me the truth, and now it was my mission to live it, to share it, and to help others prepare for what was to come. As I lay in bed each night, reflecting on the day and praying for guidance, I felt a strange mixture of peace and purpose. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I knew I wasn't walking it alone. Jesus had promised to be with me, and I could feel his presence every step of the way. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them, not because of my own strength, but because of his. The more I reflected on my journey, the more I felt the pull to leave others with a message of hope and urgency. The things I had experienced, the truths I had been shown, weren't meant to stay with me alone. I knew that deep in my soul. They were meant to ripple outward, touching lives, awakening hearts, and preparing people for what was to come. This wasn't just my story. It was God's calling for everyone who was willing to listen. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table, the house quiet except for the occasional creak of the floorboards as the kids moved in their rooms. Daniel sat across from me, his eyes warm but concerned. "You've been so quiet," he said, his hand reaching out to cover mine. "What's on your mind?" I looked at him, searching for the right words. I feel like I need to do more, I said finally. I've shared my story with some people, but it's not enough. There's so much more to say, so much more to prepare for. I feel like I'm carrying this message, this burden, and I don't know how to get it out there. He nodded, his face thoughtful. You've already done so much, he said. But if you feel like there's more, then maybe it's time to take a leap of faith. His words stayed with me long after we'd gone to bed. A leap of faith. That's exactly what it felt like. Stepping into the unknown, trusting that God would guide me even when I couldn't see the way forward. I prayed about it that night, pouring out my heart to Jesus and asking for his direction. Show me what to do, I whispered. Use me however you need to. Just help me be faithful. The next morning, I woke with a sense of clarity. I didn't need to have all the answers right away. I just needed to take the next step. And for me, that meant sharing my story on a larger scale. I started writing it all down, every detail, every vision, every word Jesus had spoken to me. It was painful at times, reliving the accident, the visions of destruction, and the moments of doubt I had faced. But as I wrote, I felt the presence of Jesus guiding me, reminding me that this wasn't about me. It was about him and the message he had entrusted to me. When I finished, I shared the writing with a few close friends and family members. Their reactions were varied. Some were moved to tears, others inspired to deepen their own faith. One friend, a pastor, encouraged me to share it with a broader audience. People need to hear this, he said. Now more than ever. That's when I decided to speak publicly, starting with local churches and community groups. The first time I stood in front of a crowd, my hands were trembling. I was terrified that people would think I was crazy or dismiss what I had to say. But as I began to speak, something shifted. The fear melted away, replaced by a deep sense of purpose. I wasn't just telling my story. I was delivering a message of hope and warning, a call to prepare, not out of fear, but out of faith. I told them about the light, the overwhelming presence of Jesus, and the visions of the future. I described the Antichrist's rise, the deception that would lead so many astray, and the small but mighty communities of believers who would stand firm. I didn't sugarcoat the challenges ahead, but I also didn't leave them without hope. The enemy's power is great, I said, but God's power is greater. Those who stay faithful, who build their lives on Jesus, will not be overcome. As I spoke, I saw the way people leaned forward in their seats, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. Some came up to me afterward, asking questions about how they could prepare. Others simply thanked me, their faces filled with a quiet resolve. I could see the seeds being planted, the way the message was beginning to take root. But it wasn't just about the big moments, the speeches, and the crowds. It was also about the small, quiet acts of faith. I spent more time with my kids, teaching them about the importance of knowing Jesus personally. We read the Bible together, prayed together, and talked openly about the world and what it meant to follow Christ. I encouraged them to ask questions, to wrestle with their faith, and to seek the truth for themselves. I wanted them to be ready, not just for the challenges ahead, but for the joy and peace that came from truly knowing Jesus. At the same time, I started to notice changes in myself. My faith grew deeper, my trust in Jesus more unshakable. I found strength in prayer, comfort in Scripture, and a sense of purpose that guided me through even the hardest days. I stopped worrying so much about what people thought of me and focused instead on being obedient to God's calling. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of doubt, still times when I felt overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. But in those moments, I returned to the promise Jesus had given me. I will never leave you, and I will never forsake you. As the months went by, I began to see signs in the world that echoed the visions Jesus had shown me. The rise of technology, the push for global solutions, the growing division, and the erosion of truth. It was all happening just as he had said it would. I shared these observations with others, not to scare them, but to help them see the importance of staying vigilant and grounded in their faith. Through it all, my message remained the same. Prepare your hearts. Build your relationship with Jesus now, while there is still time. The days ahead will be difficult, but those who remain faithful will find hope, strength, and salvation. As I write these words now, I can feel the weight of them. This journey has been one of the most challenging and transformative experiences of my life, but it has also been the most rewarding. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this: Jesus is with us, guiding us, and offering us a hope that nothing in this world can take away. And as long as I have breath in my lungs, I will continue to share that hope with anyone who will listen.